All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today for our statewide or webinar on the statewide active transportation plan. We're excited to have you all here, and we're excited about this plan and being able to talk about it. So I think we can go ahead and we'll go and get started. Let folks continue to join. Jim, can you share the? Great. Yes, welcome everybody on our webinar today. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have so many people here with us today. I'm just going to keep letting folks in just a second. So I'm Jean Sedaris. I'm the Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and I'm here with Jim Tassi, the Assistant Director of Bicycle Coalition of Maine. So quick reminder that we are recording this webinar today, and we ask everyone to please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation today. If you have any questions, you can use the chat feature, and I'll be monitoring that throughout, and we'll try to run through this fairly quickly so we can get to any questions you might have at the end. Okay, so Jim, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today. So the Statewide Active Transportation Plan is now out in its draft form. We're going to cover what it is, BCM's role in helping to create the plan. We'll talk a bit about the parts of it that we're really excited about, that we really like, and highlight a few places where we think there could be a little bit more work done. And then, of course, share about how to submit comments. We want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to make your voice heard in this draft plan as well. Great. Okay, so what this is, the Statewide Active Transportation Plan is part of the Maine DOT's family of plans. And as you can see on this, it's quite a wide-ranging and robust set of transportation needs across the state of Maine. So this is just one piece of that. Next slide. So this report, I would say there's a lot in it. There's a lot of really great stuff in it. This just covers just simply from the table of contents, but it runs through the benefits of active transportation. And I'll just note, for the purpose of this plan, active transportation is defined as human-powered modes of transportation, walking, biking, skating, skateboarding, operating a wheelchair, other mobility device, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, anything that you're doing that's really primarily or wholly human-powered. So the plan walks through the benefits of active transportation. It talks about the public engagement process that went into creating this plan. It does an assessment of the existing conditions around active transportation, including safety and policies, programs, and trends. It includes a needs assessment that looks at both on-road and off-road needs. It identifies the vision and goals, and an implementation plan. There'll be more details and appendices that are available as this plan gets written. So next slide. So, okay, so as we dive in here, the report includes a lot of information. It includes the assessment of current infrastructure. So what that actually looks like around Maine, what the infrastructure we have is. It has a really robust record of the public input on during this process that includes active transportation, interest in the issues, desires, needs, what the people of Maine are really looking for. And I'm sure many of you's comments were part of that too. So thank you for that. So it looks at a vision and a list of goals to really pursue. So it helps us have a bit of a roadmap as we look forward. It also looks at neighboring states, bike ped policies and plans to give a sense of what else is going around in the sort of northern New England area to help assess what Maine might be able to do. A documentation of the process. It includes a statement of the policies, initiatives that the Maine DOT is updating or pursuing to support active transportation in Maine. And then it also includes an implementation plan. So there's a lot of stuff in this plan. So we're going to help to kind of walk through and break it down a bit for you all. Next slide. So as we mentioned, the Bicycle Coalition of Maine was part of the group that really helped to create and draft the plan. our role was really around outreach and public engagement. So we were on a team with VHB and Cushman Transportation. And again, the public engagement piece is really where we had the most involvement and work on the plan. So we promoted and facilitated 2 sort of large public meetings that looked at not just active transportation, but a few other of the plans. 12 smaller focus groups. So these are really stakeholder meetings with subsets of different individuals representing people, issues or demographics of different groupings, and those about 200 people in those. So really great opportunity to engage a lot of people in these different formats. So the review of the HPC 3 and 4. So there will be acronyms in here. We're going to try our best to really explain those to you. Please raise your hand or put something in chat if we don't do that. But HPC is highway priority corridors. 3 and 4 are sort of the designations within that. And as a general rule, 3 and 4 corridors are ones that are sort of lower traffic volume and lower speeds. It's a generalization, but that gets you some understanding of which roads are really looked at for there. But Bicycle Coalition reviewed those roadways for engineering challenges and route connectivity to help lay out where there might be some opportunities for active transportation investments. We also offered our suggestions for recommendations to go into the plan. Facilitated 2 follow-up stakeholder meetings that happened this month. This plan was released just at the very end of 2022. So helping to continue to connect with the stakeholders that have been really involved in that. And of course, we tried to drive public comment to the Maine DOT comment portal. And we provided info on the education programming and other elements of the current conditions that BCM is particularly involved with. I'll just make one more note that this plan came together fast. It was really 1 year. It started in early 22 and concluded at the end of 22. So it was a fast moving process, but a very thorough one. Next slide. Okay, so now we're here today. So we want to provide a little bit of overview of the process and the plan elements. Again, there's a lot that happened over the last year, and there's a lot of stuff that's in here. So to help break that down a little bit and understand how we got to where we are and how this can help us look forward. We'll provide some initial thoughts on the plan. Again, things we're really excited about and places we think that could use some improvement, but give you all our initial take on it. And of course, provide you all with notification of the public comment period, how to submit your comments, which are due at the end of this month. So again, things continue to move pretty quickly here. And then we want to be able to answer any questions you have. Okay, so I'm going to hop in here. I'm going to cover so this first part of this presentation, and then Jim will take over for the second half. So what we like, and the shorthand is a lot of things. This is really great. So one, it exists, which seems pretty basic, but it is the first time Maine has ever made a plan of this type. And that is really exciting. And it demonstrates the commitment from the DOT and other stakeholders to really look at active transportation and what that means for our state. So it deserves to be celebrated, as this is the first plan of this type. It makes a really strong statement on the importance of active transportation in the state, which I know everyone on this call already knows and agrees with, but it's important to lay that out as a starting point. And it had a really robust stakeholder and public input process, as I covered a little bit of that before, but it really did look to capture the questions and ideas and desires of the public. This graphic here is just one example of the ways input was pulled together. This, if folks remember, if you took the online survey, you were given $1 and had to allocate how you would spend that money on different infrastructure or programs or education. And so that's one example of how that information was gathered and then is shown here in the report. So there's a lot of these kind of graphics that help to distill the information that was pulled together.
Yeah, and Jean, I just like to add that the public comment piece was very, very well responded to. We got close to 2,000 comments through the DOT portal. So that pie chart you see over there actually reflects, a meaningful sample of people who were contacted and who responded. So really great input from the public on this. Thanks. Here's your next slide.
Yeah. Okay. So we also appreciate that it really is an honest sort of overview of what we're facing, particularly the current conditions, that acknowledging that that funding constraints and even some of the policies that have been in place may actually have hindered some implementation of active transportation. So it really does look at where we are and how we got here and what the impacts of that may be. It also acknowledges and leans on some really great work that's already being done on rail trail potentials for active transportation corridors. Again, I'm sure many of you are involved in a lot of this. And really, it does lean on some work that's already being done, which is also nice to see when you can pull together what other groups and stakeholders are doing and help to fold that into the plan. So it's great. So one of the things that I think really struck me when I was reviewing this plan is that it's a really nice mix of infrastructure, policies, programs, and education, right? It's not assuming one of those things is going to be the solution, that we really need to look at all of these things and the sort of well-rounded approach to what the needs are to address limitations, what might be preventing us from doing more of this, and what might be really successful in those, but understanding it is not a one-size-fits-all or one approach to that. We really need all these different ways to get at active transportation to really make a difference. It identifies some really great goals for the Maine DOT to pursue, particularly in the context of policy or continuing to engage stakeholders and what infrastructure efforts might look like. And I think at the end of the day, it really helps us write a roadmap to improving active transportation facilities, to making our roads safer, and providing more transportation choices that are available to people all across the state. So I think that roadmap piece is really critical. It'll be a document we can continue to look back to or refer to as a guidepost of where we want to go and how we're going to get there. Okay, so it's a big document. I hope some of you have taken some time to look at it, but there's a lot of information in there. So we wanted to call out a couple of sections that we would particularly encourage you to read through. One is the section 4, the public engagement. So again, like that slide we showed of the how you would spend $1 on it, really helps to capture some of the feedback they got from the public and what folks are looking for and what they need. So it's a nice overview of what the public engagement looked like and what information they got from that. So needs assessment, so it identifies what the state need both for on-road and off-road. So really also breaking those two separately to look at that. And then section 8, which is the implementation. So this is really looking at the goals they want to be achieved and the strategies for how they're going to get there. So if you're not able to read the whole document, we would encourage you to take a look at those 3 sections in particular. I think, okay, so that's my section of it. I'm now going to pass it over to Jim. And again, reminder, please put your questions or comments in the chat. Jim's going to try to walk through this at a pretty quick pace so we can have some time for questions at the end. So please put them in there and I'll keep an eye on it. All right, Jim, over to you.
Thanks, Jean, and hi, everybody. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us and hear about this plan, which, as Jean said, we're really excited about. It's been a long time coming, and it's great to see this plan come together. I was very proud to be a member of the team that worked on it, and it was fun and it was enlightening. It was all kinds of things. But as with any draft document, there are things that might need additional polish. And going through, we thought that we would call your attention to the things that we felt needed to be worked on a little bit more in the plan. And probably the overarching thing that struck us is that there's no time frame here. There's no there's no schedule of when any of this is going to happen. And, without a schedule and performance targets, you don't really have, a plan. You have a set of aspirations and things that we'd like to do. And so the first thing that, BCM wants to convey to, all of you as stakeholders in this process, and we'll be sharing these comments with the team. This plan needs a timetable. It needs some performance metrics, and at a minimum, it needs to direct the Maine DOT to spend some time at least creating that plan for the implementation of all the great goals that are outlined in this. To your left here in the image, you see the actual schedule that the team working on the plan had to follow and hit milestones for. And we think that something similar should be created for the entire SATP, so that DOT can move methodically and systematically towards completing the many great goals that are in it. So in addition to having a clear schedule of when things are going to happen, we think that we need to have more concrete performance measures. In the plans that were referenced from Vermont, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania, in the plan, you'll see that they call out some of the performance measures, or performance indicators are sometimes called, that these other states are using to track progress towards creating a better, more complete and supportive active transportation environment. And we think that this plan should follow that suit. I mean, right now it kind of lacks performance measures. There are some references to miles of trails built per year, but it's something that is aspired to. Some of the shoulders that were discussed as being put on some of the rural highways were, things that are desired, but they're not concretely planned for, and there's no rigor behind the performance targets to achieving those kinds of additions to the system. So, in short, we think that it'd be worthwhile for the team to continue looking at setting targets for the miles of bike lanes that are built, the miles of shoulders that are on HPATCs, which is a brand new acronym that the plan brings to Maine transportation conversations. That stands for High Priority Active Transportation Corridors. And so we'd like to see a way to kind of track the attention that's being spent on those high priority active transportation corridors. And indeed, going back to our first point, the first step that's going, or one of the first steps that needs to come out of this plan, is the establishment of exactly what those are. So that's another whole kind of assessment and evaluation process that this plan is going to kick off. But miles of trail, how many feet of sidewalk were constructed annually? And we'd like to see a commitment to actually issuing a progress report, like make this a more transparent process that really shows the great work that the DOT is doing to build out and expand the active transportation network. So if you read the plan, you'll see there are lots of references to fiscal constraints. And we do live in a fiscally constrained environment in the transportation world here in Maine. There are acknowledgements that all the goals in the statewide active transportation plan cannot be achieved with current funding levels. And the implementation plan on the funding thing, their first bullet is, or let's actually just maintain current funding. I think that there is room for a conversation about expanding funding now, or at least planning for that expanded funding. Again, they talk about, the plan talks about pursuing additional funding opportunities, but there's not really a lot of specificity as to when that's going to happen, and how that might look. So we'd like to suggest that perhaps beginning to increase funding for active transportation sooner rather than later would be a good way to kind of kick off really achieving some of the goals that the plan is seeking. So it needs to include funding targets, like how much more per year, or what's the annual amount you want to get towards the AT budget. and when do you want to hit that mark by, and how are you going to get there? So we think some of that specificity is needed to kind of move this plan along. We think the plan needs more references to more bike lanes and separated facilities. I was struck as I read it, and I must have read this draft 4 or 5 times, and I double checked, but there are very few references to bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, parking buffer bike lanes, fully separated side path facilities, all the kinds of things that were mentioned regularly as priorities by the public. Don't really appear as much in the plan as might be desirable. The Village Partnership Initiative, which is a great flagship program that the DOT is rolling out so that communities can imagine redesigns to their downtowns and strategies to make them more convenient and safe and accessible for vulnerable users, doesn't actually at any point make a reference to bike lanes or other on-road bike facilities. I mean, so bikeways, even things like shared lane markings are a little bit absent. There is a call out block that talks about a variety of facilities that are used in Maine, but it overlooks some of the really more ambitious contemporary practices that are being employed by designers across the country. And so, I'd like to suggest that, the team take a look at the plan and, build a little bit more rhetoric into or catalog the kinds of facilities that could be used within the VPI process, including bike lanes, separated facilities where appropriate, and so forth. They're different from shoulders, and the plan does talk a lot about shoulders, as you see, but we'd like to see some more references to just kind of bicycle specific infrastructure. The plan does talk quite a lot about shoulders as an important tool in a rural state like Maine for providing better access for vulnerable users. I've already heard some concerns about that. The public opinion as reflected in the comments and what we saw from the input does indicate that the public is supportive of shoulders and would like to see, again, bike lanes and ideally more separated facilities. And there was a kind of an inconsistency around the issue of shoulders that we identified in the plan. There's a lot of references to 4-foot minimums with caveats that, well, maybe not everywhere, but, as you get into the plan, you begin to get the sense that, this section might have been not edited in synchrony with the other section, because there's sort of an emphasis on 3-foot shoulders as a likely minimum on some of the highway corridor priority 3 roads, and only a 1 to 3 on highway corridor priority 4 roads. And these shoulders are, these wider shoulders are noted as desired, but again, there's no specific mechanism for ensuring that they will come to be built. So, our kind of final takeaway on the shoulder issues is, and there are people who will say that even a 4-foot shoulder is not wide enough on many of the routes used by riders in rural Maine. But this section seems to say that 4-foot shoulders may not even be the norm. And so I think that this is a section of the plan that needs to be looked at again, polished up a little bit more, and it needs some clarification and consistency. And it's, it sounds like a minor detail, but because shoulders are discussed so much in the plan as a strategy for improving access on these rural highways, it rose to a level of importance that we decided we needed to comment on. So that's one of the other issues that we really identified as needing a little bit more work.
Hey, Jim, just real quick, going back on that slide. I just noticed that we have HPC and HCP. Can you just clarify? Yeah,
I put a chat note in there too. So HPC is a typo. It should be HCP, which stands for Highway Corridor Priority. And Maine uses a 1 through 5 system where priority 1s are like really important roads that are in the national highway system. So the Turnpike, 95, some of the major non-highway roads. Route 1 is a priority 1 for a number of areas, and then it kind of just goes down the scale towards quieter and quieter and less busy roads until you get to the street that the BCM is on, which is a fairly short, fairly quiet street on a backwater in Bayside in Portland, is a category 5. So it's kind of the lowest priority. The category 3 and 4 roads and 5 roads when they're around, but we looked at 3 and 4s. But these are the roads that people are most likely to ride bikes on and to walk on. They have a little less volume, typically lower speeds, and are still useful as connectors between destinations. And so the team and the DOT really kind of wanted to look at these HPC 3 and 4 roads to figure out whether there are ways to kind of identify connections and longer routes that might be useful for active transportation. So as we think about commenting, I mean, of course, you should read the plan and respond as you see fit. And I think there's a lot to like in this plan, and there's a few things that you might want to see some more polish put on, as we did here. The points, kind of summing up the things that we identified as things that we're going to be commenting on. We're gonna talk about getting a clearer time frame established. We're going to talk about establishing performance measures that will quantify the progress towards the implementation goals in the plan. We're probably going to talk about a need to expand funding immediately. That's probably not a terribly surprising comment from us, because we're almost always saying that there needs to be more funding put at active transportation. We would like to see a little bit more discussion and description of truly contemporary bike ped facilities and designs, including things like buffered bike lanes, other separated facilities, and really see the VPI kind of pushing and integrating those facilities in the planning discussions that they're having with communities across the state. And we'd like to see some clarification on the shoulder issue, and frankly, see a commitment made to minimum 4-foot shoulders on those HPC roads, with yearly minimum targets for the high priority active transportation corridors. I think that there will rightly be a prioritization process that identifies, which of those kinds of roads are likely to see, ridership, whether there's latent demand that people aren't riding on the road because there's not currently a good space for them, or in places where there already is some ridership. Those are the places where the BCM wants to really work with the DOT to make higher priority for getting those shoulder expansions on there. And 4 is 4 in some quarters is not enough. In some other quarters, it's too much. We see it as a reasonable compromise that's fairly pragmatic. I think on higher volume, higher speed roads, obviously more separation, more distance, more vertical elements are desirable. But in any event, the plan needs to get a little bit more consistent on what it's going to really kind of guide the department towards with respect to shoulders on these rural highways. The next steps for BCM are, so tomorrow I'm meeting with the commissioner, and a few people I see on this call are going to be there as well. So you've got a preview of some of the points that I'll probably be making to the commissioner. We are also going to be submitting additional, more detailed and more granular written comments, as well as an annotated plan to both VHB and the Maine DOT, so that the team can see exactly what our position is on some elements in the plan that might need to continue to get a little work. We're going to continue to do stuff like this. I mean, we want to get you guys to respond, to show the department how important getting this right is. And so we're going to encourage you to submit comments on the plan. And then we're going to continue to work on initiating efforts to address those more work needed elements that we just talked about, and see if we can figure out ways to move the ball forward and come up with clear timeframes for when we're going to do things like look at the complete streets policy, look at the speed limit policy, do the prioritization of the active transportation corridors. So plenty of work coming out of this plan for all of us as well, but we're very excited that it exists and happy to do the next steps. Ways to comment, and we'll pop these links into the chat. I might be able to do that right here. No, I cannot. Oh, sorry. We will get these in the chat when we're talking in the discussion section about to start. But it's the first link takes you to the family of plans site, so you'll have the opportunity to look at some of the other plans in the family of plans, including the rail plan, the aviation plan, and the transit plan. If you scroll down that site, you'll come to a comment page, and I've given you the direct comment link that takes you directly to leave a comment. You can leave quite a lengthy comment. The box might be a little bit sort of feeling limiting at first, but it actually will take a very lengthy comment, and make sure that you select the box that indicates you're commenting on the active transportation plan. And stay in touch with us if you have comments that you'd like to convey to us, or the stuff that you want to talk through, or just kind of bounce some ideas back and forth on. We have easy emails to remember. Jean is jean@bikemaine.org, and I'm jim@bikemaine.org. Thanks for your attention, and we're going to open it up to questions. If you could please use the raise hand feature in Zoom to ask your question. That will put a certain amount of orderliness and decorum on that part of the process. I'm going to stop sharing screen at this time. And I see Tim Blair immediately pops his hand up.
We
Hi,
also have
Tim.
some questions in the comments. So Tim, why don't you go, and then I'll try to distill some of the comment questions.
Great. Hi, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity. I have 4 questions. I think they might be relevant to everybody, though. The first one is just confirming the deadline of feedback. Is it really the end of January? So
it really is January 30th.
Is it worth providing feedback that, just to clarify, that for a lot of us that work with committees and subcommittees and are looking to get input from community members who were not around on New Year's Eve when the report arrived, it doesn't allow for the normal process for groups like ours to actually get the feedback that we need and make recommendations in a thoughtful way. Instead, it creates a little bit of an emergency that nobody really needs. So I just want to provide that honest feedback and say, if there's any opportunity to extend that timeline, you get a much better product and it wouldn't feel rushed. And I think for something this big, if we can do that, I would really like to advocate for that. So that was just my first comment. Second comment is, broadly, if we see something that's just clearly missing, that has been talked about for years, that was referenced in feedback and questionnaires. For example, the Androscoggin to Kennebec multi-use trail that's proposed to connect Brunswick to Bath, which now West Bath, Brunswick, and Bath are actively engaging in moving forward with. It's not on the map. It's not on the list of proposed trails. How did that happen? And how do we get it back on there? Like, what's the most effective way to make sure a project that's been talked about for years is not excluded in this really important document?
Okay.
That's my second question.
Okay, so let me get the first 2 done, because I'm going to forget the questions as we move along here. I will, I know that some of the team members are on this call. They've heard your comment about a longer comment period. We were also a little bit, feeling compressed by the time frame that this all unrolled in, and I did actually at one point argue for pushing it out a little bit further. But I think that there is a desire on the department's part to close this process up. I would say do the best you can. You can always comment as a concerned citizen, independent of being a member of a bike ped committee. to the extent that you're able to get the committee convened and have a comment, that'd be great. And I would say, submit it even after the deadline. I mean, it is possible to email the active transportation planner directly and other members of the planning staff at the Maine DOT directly, so that they're continuing to know that people are thinking about this plan and continuing to comment on it. And I think you could begin that comment with the point that you just made about the normal processes of committees are on a schedule, and if you don't have a meeting between now and the end of January, you're not going to have a chance to have a substantive conversation. The second point was the Androscoggin River Trail, and so the plan does make reference to some off-road trails that are not in the target, like railroad corridors, that are getting a lot of conversation, and this might be in the background of that. But I would say absolutely, if you see a plan or a project that is moving along and is representative of the kinds of goals that the plan outlines, throwing some details back at the team would only be helpful.
Okay, and just to clarify, I think that was done as part of the initial discovery process. All that information was shared. So I just want to understand is, in this next go around, how do we make sure that these important comments are actually included, or that a reference to a trail that's being worked on by municipalities is actually included? Is it just me as an individual? Is it a letter writing from all three communities? I really want to know how to hit it hard in the next week.
Well, I would say it's that, get the towns to get on the record saying, we're concerned that this wasn't actually specifically referenced in the plan. I mean, there's a lot of projects that are in the offing that weren't mentioned specifically in the plan. So I guess I would say that, the absence of a concrete reference to that project doesn't mean it's not like one of the projects that's, being thought about in the context of the plan's broader goals.
Okay. All right, great. And then just two other items. The first one, in a couple of the meetings that I participated in that you all facilitated, there was a lot of discussion around the vulnerable users of the road, and a real emphasis on talking about the importance of elevating children in particular as vulnerable users. And there were some suggestions about actually updating the vision statement to call out not just all Mainers, but Mainers of all ages, so that we really give voice to the children and the elderly, many of whom don't drive and are required to walk or bike to get around. I searched the document. Confession, I haven't been able to read the whole 80 pages yet. I've read a lot of it, but I searched and I found the word children in one section that talked about demographics and the importance that 15% of Mainers don't drive. The only other place children are mentioned is in an education and program area, like teaching kids how to ride bikes. There's no reference to addressing the needs of that vulnerable population, and I want to get that in there. I feel like it's really important. Lots of other participants. So same thing, just include that in comments, and I would encourage others to do that if you think that's important.
I think that's a great catch. I think that you call that out, and I think that's a relatively simple revision to make, and I think that comment is likely to get rapidly adopted, and
Okay.
yeah, please share it.
Thanks. And then lastly, a technical thing, speed is throughout the document. There's like the word speed is referenced like 100 times. As I scanned through it, I was looking for a reference to the state's current approach for reviewing speed limits when municipalities go and ask for a review because citizens are concerned about speed. As we all know, there's concerns about doing that because sometimes the end result is the speed limit goes up. The assumption is in this plan, there's going to be a new approach, like a new context for evaluating speed limits. But I didn't see it anywhere called out that there's going to be a fundamental change in sort of the review process, or that the current review process is not working to meet the needs of active transportation. Should that be called out in this plan?
I think you should call it out in your comments. I think that the team did talk about that at some length, and there was a number of recommendations that were made to the department that got sort of massaged internally up there. And what has come out on that particular issue in the plan is a commitment to review the speed limit setting policies that the DOT uses. And so it is actually under the implementation plan, it's strategy 1C, I think, which tells you how close I'm getting to this plan. It is a statement that says they are going to review the process by which speeds are set. BCM has been poking DOT for years on this particular issue. We would like to see that review happen. I'm certain that it will. And again, going back to my point about like more polish needed, the big question is when. And I'd like to see a commitment to getting that done sooner rather than later, or at least started sooner rather than later, because from my work outside being on the SATP team, I can tell you we hear about speed constantly. And it's a big issue, and the concerns that you highlight are ones that need to be dealt with. And so I think that what we'll see is another process that's going to unfold, that's going to look at those speed setting policies, and there'll be other opportunities for the public to offer comments and suggestions during that process. I certainly hope. BCM, I expect, will be at the table, and we will be doing what we can to represent any stakeholders who aren't explicitly invited to the process.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for addressing those, and thanks everyone for giving me a chance to ask 4 questions. And for those of you that are excited about any of those issues, please submit as many comments as you can. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, always great kicking us off with some great questions. So, so there was a fair amount of comments and questions about the shoulder issue, Jim, in the chat. So I'm kind of distilled them a bit, but if you could talk a little bit more about lane width and how that's referenced in the plan and what that looks like, because we all know, narrower lanes just naturally slow down traffic. And then a little bit about just the guidelines around when you can put in a bike lane, when there's no sidewalk there, or some of the other constraints that are just exist, particularly on rural roads, and what that might mean. And then if there was anything in the plan about maintenance of shoulders, right, that they often are kind of the crumbliest part of a road. And just any thoughts you have on how the plan addresses that.
Well, so I'll take the point you made about when can you use a bike lane. A bike lane is probably best used in a sort of village or residential context in which you've got some trip generators and you've got destinations where people are going. I mean, generally speaking, in rural Maine, way out in the middle of Route 26, you might not expect to see a bike lane. And indeed, the DOT prefers that communities not stencil a shoulder as a bike lane if there are sidewalks available. I'm sorry, not sidewalks available. So in any context where there is a sidewalk, a shoulder can be labeled as a bike lane. Where there is not a sidewalk, DOT wants you to just call it a shoulder, because then it's seen as a facility that can be used by either bicycle riders or people walking. The minimum width under national design specs is that a bike lane needs to be at least 5 feet wide, except in constrained situations. And on under federal highway guidance, certainly some of the higher speed roads, anything over about 35 miles per hour, and anything that's got more than 5,500 to 6,000 cars per day, federal highway specs push towards separated facilities and increasingly, more distance and separation between the people on the edge of the road and the travel lanes. Travel lanes, DOT has a kind of a blanket policy on travel lanes that they shall be 11 feet. BCM has tried to change that engineering guidance and talk to the engineering staff at DOT to suggest maybe in context 35 and under, they should be 10 feet, and you have to actually go through a appeal process to make them bigger. Currently, they have to be 11 feet, and you have to use an appeal process to make them smaller on DOT roads. Those smaller travel lanes do permit, it gives you an extra foot of space to do something with, whether it's a buffer or whether it's additional shoulder space. And on some of these lower speed contexts, that might be something else that, in the context of our continued more granular and detailed conversations with the DOT and the team on this plan, that'll be something that probably comes up again.
Great.
And is that enough on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we could go on and talk about shoulders for quite some time. But I think that gives a good context. So a couple other questions. Does the plan lay out goals for active transportation participation, kind of like transit systems, my proposed ridership targets? Is there anything about measuring or setting targets in the plan for active
It does not. I think it was either Minnesota. One of the neighboring states bike plans did have kind of metrics like that, and there are actually references in some of those neighboring states' plans to count programs, and a count program is one of the ways you're going to actually establish some sense of what the riderships are, and we do feel that is something that needs to be implemented in the state of Maine, and we encourage people to make comments setting the growth of the mode use of more bicycle riders as a performance measure.
Great, thanks. Actually, one more thing on shoulders. Someone just put a good comment in there that you just gave a lot of good information about lane widths, shoulder widths, and what the rules are. Is there a place where people go to find that information that is readable by general public?
There is. If you dig around the DOT site a little bit and you look for, I forget the actual name of their page, but it's basically road design parameters, and there is information in the engineering instructions. The lane width issue is, I want to say it's EI6 is what I think it is. It's an engineering instruction on lane width. If you Google that, you may well find it. You can shoot me an email later, and I'll shoot you the link to that, and to the page that spells out some of the cross section expectations. Interestingly, the SATP says that a lot of the rural roads, you got a road that's a maximum of about maybe 26, 25 feet wide. The minimum that DOT is saying, or that this plan is saying is going to happen on some roads, is that you will get 2 11-foot lanes and a 1-foot shoulder on either end, so that you get a minimum of 24 feet of pavement. I did see in the chat that a shoulder that's 1 to 2 to even 3 feet wide is marginal as a space for a vulnerable user to be in. It's not an ideal amount of separation at almost any volume or speed of traffic. And so that's something that I imagine we will be continuing to talk about a little bit. And it's something, in that whole shoulder discussion, I think that there are some ambiguities that need to be sort of hashed out and made specific.
Great, thanks. Just do one more question in the chat, and then Tom, will go to you with your hand raised. Can you talk a little bit about the implementation and monitoring to this plan? Is the DOT responsible? Like, who is actually responsible for taking this and doing something with it? And how might community members, organizations kind of monitor it? And I think that's one of our points, is we'd like more clarity on timeline and performance measures. But is there anything else you would share on the implementation of it?
This is very much DOT. This is ultimately a document that is intended to guide DOT as it envisions and builds out the active transportation network. I think that it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to look at what's in the plan and ask questions about, hey, have you done this yet? Hey, have you gotten to this yet? And that's why, as Jean said, we'd like to see a schedule and some specific target timelines set up for some of the initiatives and goals that are laid out in the plan. And so, but it's DOT's job to do these things. It's our job to encourage them to get on it and to monitor progress. So I think that BCM is going to be paying a lot of attention to the specific goals in this plan and getting a sense of how quickly the department is moving on fulfilling them.
Great, thank you. All right, Tom, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, Jim, it kind of is the same question that was just posed that you addressed, but having been at this for a long time over my career, over time, as you all know, MDOT has changed, kind of the landscape with respect to how they make decisions about alternative transportation projects. And my concern is, I think it's wonderful that the plan has been produced. That implementation piece is critical for all of us who are working in our respective communities to move these projects forward, understand the best way we can utilize the plan to encourage MDOT to follow through so that some of these projects that have been languishing for years and years start to become prioritized and actually executed.
Hi, Tom. I'm completely with you. I agree. I think that a big part of that is the funding piece, and that's why we think the plan should make a commitment to increasing funding sooner rather than later, because there are a lot of projects that are, I don't know if they're languishing. They're certainly idle and not moving forward as quickly as we'd like. Including some in your neighborhood, some in Southern Maine, some, all over the state. So, again, it's going to be all of us as a community of people interested in active transportation, continuing to have the conversation with DOT about, how are you doing on this? We haven't seen any announcement of, the complete streets policy review. We haven't seen, so these are the kind of things that we expect to be really guiding our advocacy work for the indefinite future until it's all done, and then we'll start working on the next plan. But I think we all need to be asking those questions, and I think that if the DOT would make a plan as part of this plan to chart out what the implementation timelines are and which things are going to be done first, I think that would go a long way to just answering some of your questions, but also generally moving progress forward on a lot of AT projects.
Colin, you have a
Chat question or Colin?
I'm gonna go to Colin. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Colin.
Oh, you're muted, Colin.
This is your first time on Zoom, Colin?
It is my first time. Well, first of all, just thanks to all of you for your hard work on this plan, and to Maine Dot. It's really exciting that we've got this plan. I echo all the comments. I think it's really all about implementation, and this might already exist. So it might, my ignorance might be unveiled here, but when I lived in Massachusetts and worked for MassDOT, there was a bicycle and pedestrian advisory board made up of advocates, bicycle and pedestrian committee members. And they actually had like a direct ear to the secretary and active transportation staff. And I feel, I'm wondering, if that was discussed as part of this, if it exists. If it doesn't, was it discussed as part of this plan? Because it does seem like complete streets, that street policy, that could be a way to really, sort of keep Maine Dot accountable for actually moving forward on these things. Because I think I just reiterate, what everyone else has said, which is how are we actually going to make sure this stuff happens and it doesn't sit on the shelf?
Yeah, well, so the answer to your first question is there an advisory group? There is a bike ped council It's been around since, since before I started at the BCM. It meets with somewhat inconsistent regularity. So it hasn't met for probably a year. I think Patrick may have convened it a couple times during his tenure, and I know that Dakota, the new AT planner, is interested in convening it and getting it together. And I think that this is exactly one of the places where, kind of the concentrated inside voices on let's get going on this stuff and what's it going to look like. That's where some of these conversations are going to happen. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'd love to see that group meeting more regularly again, and really perhaps being part of the team that's doing some of the policy review, and certainly being key stakeholders in those reviews.
So a clarifying question on that, Jim. Bike ped advisory group different from the statewide active communities group. So there's always a lot of names that have similar words in them, but these are different entities.
Yeah, so I don't know what it's going to be called going forward. It used to be called the Bike Ped Council, and there are people on this call who have been to those meetings, and it's exactly the kind of thing that Colin's alluding to. It's a series of it's a bunch of representatives from bike ped committees, from stakeholder groups. Sometimes engineering firms appear at it, and it hasn't met for a while. And I think that in your comments, folks, you can actually put in a plug for let's reconvene that group, and let's make that group have a meaningful role in the conversation about implementing the really laudable goals that are in this plan.
Great. Okay, we're closing up on our hour, but a couple more questions here, and this one seems very apt at this moment. Can you talk a little bit about taking the plan from draft to final? So we know we've got this 1 month comment period. Do you have information of sort of what happens next, when we might expect a final one, anything like that?
I don't exactly know, and I will look into that, and that's something that we will actually perhaps give an update on in a BCM news blast or some other vehicle. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, if the comments that come through are really asking for a fair amount of revision and polish and clarification, we may find that the DOT decides to delay the adoption of the plan so that additional revisions can be made and perhaps timetables can be created. So the short answer is I'm not sure. This is really the first step in the next step process, and it's really the first public conversation about the plan, and we'll see where this goes.
Yeah, and we know this plan, as you said, it's sort of part of this family of plans. So they all will feed into a long range plan that the Maine DOT will put together. And as someone also pointed out, DOT also does 3-year plans. So these all kind of feed in and have different levels of detail as the DOT figure out its work plan.
Yeah, and the 3-year work plan is critical. It's probably in development right now, and it'd be nice to figure out a way to get some of these AT projects included on it. I see. I think Senator Chipman's got his hand up.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Ben.
I just want to say hello to everybody, and I just wanted to, for those who don't know, I've recently been appointed to be the new Senate Chair of the Transportation Committee, and really look forward to working with you in any way that I can to implement this plan and other goals that we share. So I just wanted to say hello and let you know that. So look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Ben. Great. We were so happy to hear that you got that position, and we look forward to working with you too. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us soon. You've been on my to-call list, and I'd like to set up a meeting and chat with you soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Well, at that, we're at 12:59. this conversation can keep going in a lot of different forms. Do make sure that you offer your own comments. Feel free to be in touch with us about ways you can be involved with our efforts to kind of get this plan implemented and get the elements in it, finished up and ready to go. We will be sending out a link to this webinar, which is being recorded, and we'll have the slide deck available as well. And like I said, we'll be talking to the DOT and the project team with more comments very shortly. So thank you all and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks all. Take care.